Well, we have put in place the leave of absence regime for people who are returning from mainland China outside of Hubei province. In fact, we started this as an advisory initially for certain groups. Later, we expanded it to all sectors and made it mandatory, and we have been enforcing this. And so far, it's been a regime that has been useful. We have not had any confirmed cases amongst the returnees, but this has been a useful and important precaution that we have put in place. But now we are reassessing and looking at the situation, particularly what's happening in mainland China. When we started LOA end January, there were 4,000 cases outside of Hubei province in China. Now it has tripled to 12,000. So the number of cases continues to rise. At the same time, there are substantial number of Singaporeans, citizens, permanent residents, and long-term pass holders still in China. Right? I think at some point in time, they will want to come back to Singapore, especially after the Chinese New Year holidays. And there is a higher chance now that some of them will be infected with the virus. And that's why we have decided to introduce a new stay-at-home notice for all who are returning from China. This stay-at-home notice will be stricter than the LOA, than the leave of absence, in that we will require everyone coming back to stay at home throughout the 14-day period. So unlike the LOA, they will not be allowed to even leave their homes briefly at all. Right? They will have to stay at home strictly throughout the 14-day period, and we will apply this to all who are coming back. Singaporeans, permanent residents, long-term pass holders. We will issue them the notice when they arrive at the airport and then ensure that they immediately go back and they will comply with this new requirement. This will also cover all the workers with work permit holders or work pass holders who are returning. For these workers, we have said earlier that they already the employers are already required to seek prior approval from MUM before they return. Right, so that's already one check for such category of workers, the ones on work passes. The employers have to seek prior approval from MUM, and then when they return, they will have to serve out this 14-day requirement, either at the places that they are staying, or if the employers need help, they approach MUM and we will find them suitable dormitories where they can serve out this new stay-at-home notice. Right, so it will cover all who are coming back, and we will enforce the requirements strictly. We will use technology to ensure that they are staying at home. We can do so through video calls, through their phones, identifying where their locations are through spot checks. We will use a whole range of methods to enforce and make sure that there is compliance with the regime. And we have already put in place some penalties, and we will ensure that the penalties are stricter. Right? So anyone who's on long-term pass that doesn't comply with the regime, we will revoke the passes. A Singaporean who doesn't comply with the regime, we will be able to prosecute under the Infectious Diseases Act. So the penalties will be in place, and we will ensure that there is strict compliance with this new notice. Essentially, what we are doing is, I think the approach we are taking is something that all of you would be familiar with. We put in place measures, but they are not static. We continuously reassess the situation and the risk, and then we update our measures progressively as and when it is necessary. So we believe this new update to introduce a stay-at-home notice is timely now. With the new stay-at-home notice, we will no longer be issuing any more leave of absence after this. Everything for anyone coming back from China, we will issue the stay-at-home notice, and we think this is appropriate at this juncture. It will ensure that we reduce the number of imported cases coming back from China, and then we can focus our energies on limiting or reducing the risk of local transmission of the virus within Singapore. Okay, happy to take questions.
Essentially, is the stay-at-home notice the same as a quarantine at home? And also, I know you said substantial number, and I know it's hard to estimate, but are we able to give a ballpark figure as to how many of these returning are we expecting?
So the stay-at-home notice is essentially similar to a home quarantine. The only difference is that with a home quarantine, because these are people who have come into close contact with infected persons, we have stricter requirements in terms of they need to be isolated within the room, within the home. They need to be, to have their own separated from other people within the home. So the requirements are stricter in that sense. But other than that, other than the physical requirements of the space, the stay-at-home notice will be essentially the same as a home quarantine from henceforth, right? Meaning to say they have to stay within their home at all times. In terms of numbers, it's really hard to give you a sense of the numbers because, first of all, we're not just talking about the PRC workers. We are also talking about Singaporeans, permanent residents who are in China now. Right? We don't know the stock figure, and we don't have a good, accurate estimate of the stock figure. Neither do we know how many will be coming back. I mean, some may be there and happy to stay there, and some may want to come back. So it's hard to say how many will come back, but as of now, there are limited flights. So they will come. If they come back, they will have to make their own flight arrangements, and we want to just prepare for a scenario where they do come back in waves after the Chinese New Year period, and that's why we think we need a tighter and stricter regime to be put in place right now.
So, Minister, how we can stop visitors visit them when they stay at home, right? So they have to stop visitors visiting them, right?
Well, whether or not we would discourage them from having visitors to come, certainly. And that would be our advisory for all who are stay-at-home notice. But the main thing is this, that they are not allowed to leave their homes. That's the main thing. Whether or not people want to visit, I think once there is a stay-at-home notice and they are aware, I don't think, it really depends, right? If it's a family member, very close family member, they might still want to visit, take some precautions, but the requirements, the main requirement is that they have to stay at home.
So besides the use of technology, would there be like spot checks?
Of course, that's what I mentioned. So technology, using the phones, video calls, phone calls, as well as spot checks.
But isn't it kind of difficult to enforce it? I mean, you're saying that you encourage not to have visitors, but how is it going to be possible to strictly enforce it?
The visitors is not a compliance requirement. The requirement is stay at home. And I think we can enforce that through the range of measures that I just described.
This calling is every day? Everyday calling?
Sorry?
It's checking.
Will you call every day?
Oh,
Yeah.
how often will we call?
Often, yeah.
We will work out, the enforcement officers will work out a regime. I can't tell you that they will call at this time, because if I tell you that they will call at this time, I think it defeats the purpose of the enforcement regime. They will make surprise calls, they will make surprise spot checks, and that will be the way in which we enforce.
Are they allowed to share a room with others, and will they get the $100 allowance a day? And also, why do this now? Because there have already been new restrictions for work pass holders that have been imposed with big penalties, right? Have there been any people flouting LOA requirements who are not workers, and how many cases of this are there?
So we have, I think, indicated that there have been some cases of LOA who have not met the requirements, and we have publicized these cases beyond the workers. But the reason why I say we are putting in these new requirements now, strictly that they stay at home, is, as I mentioned, the situation. We look at the assessment of risk, we look at the numbers in China, and we look at the risk of people coming back who may have the virus, and we think tighter precautions are necessary. What was your first question?
Can they share a room, and will they get the $100 a day
Yes.
allowance?
So, like I said, the room requirements and what they do within the home, that's we leave them to decide for themselves, right? Because these are quite different from quarantine personnel, right? Those on quarantine would have close contact with infected persons, and therefore there is a tighter, stricter requirement in terms of the need for them to be isolated within the home environment. Those on the stay-at-home notice, they have not had close contact with infected persons, and so we do not impose as tight a requirement as home quarantine, but this new precaution is that they must stay at home. They are not allowed to leave their homes at all. As to whether they will get this home quarantine support, the answer is yes, but again, just to be very clear, the support is given to the employers, right, and to the self-employed Singaporeans and permanent residents.
So can I ask what the penalties, specific penalties are for the homestay notice? Is it the same as the quarantine orders?
Different, right? Because this will be like I said, there are a range of different penalties. If someone is holding a foreign pass, a long-term pass, then the consequence would be immediately we can revoke the pass, right? That would be a very, I think, strict penalty, and we can impose that. If it's a Singaporean, then it's a different matter, but then we'll look at prosecuting under the Infectious Diseases Act.
Can I invite a last question? What kind of precautions should family members take? And the other thing I want to ask is, the employers would know that the workers are not supposed to work, so why are we penalizing the workers?
Sorry, say again.
So the first question is...
Second question.
So the work passes of the workers will be revoked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the employers would have the knowledge that they are not supposed to be working. So, in that sense, the workers are the ones getting penalized for, something that the employers could have advised them on. So why are they getting penalized?
Well, the employers we would have advised the individuals to stay at home. We will make it very clear once they land at the airport. We will issue the notice and make clear these are the requirements. So the breach of the stay-at-home notice, I think, is a breach by the individual, not by the employer. The employer has the responsibility to ensure that they provide adequate accommodation, and that's why we are requiring employers to seek prior approval from MUM before any of these workers come back. And if you don't do that, you don't seek prior approval to assure us that there are suitable accommodations, then yes, we will take action against the employers, as we have already done, right? The first question?
What precautions should family members...
family members. Well, I think family members, they should, again, understand what the risk is. These are not people who have been close contact with infected persons. Let's be very clear. They are different from people under quarantine. But you know that they have been in China in the last 14 days. There is some risk. It's different from anyone who has been in close contact with an infected person. So if there are family members within the same home, then you want to take precautions, then by all means look at some social distancing. Look at making sure when you prepare food, you take the necessary precautions, you have common utensils. So the common sense, good hygiene precautions that one would take, I think would still be applied in this circumstance.